You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're joined by Cassidy, Boulan, and Thom Stead of the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. We chat about their work in Philadelphia, Trenton, and Greater New Jersey related to complete streets and creating safe infrastructure for biking. Stay with us. Today's podcast was produced in partnership with Impact, formerly Railvolution. For a deeper dive on livability issues, visit impactmobility.org, mpactmobility.org. Wow. Hey, everybody. Wow, what a great week. We just had our 500th episode. I'm still buzzing about that. And we'll continue to celebrate that over the next few weeks as we release episodes of 501, 502, 503 of the podcast. But we're lucky enough to be guests on Kia Wilson's awesome The Break podcast here on Streets Blog. So go to your podcatcher and check that one out because we'll talk about 500th episode there and some of the stuff that we're working on. We also were I just talked to John Zimmerman at Active Towns too. And so that one should premiere on YouTube or on podcatchers sometime in October. So stay tuned for that. And we'll be there for that as well. But I just also wanted to share with you all some of the great submissions we got from folks about reaching the 500 milestone. We got some audio submissions, some written submissions. So we'll share those. I'll read some of them aloud and we'll play some of those out as the podcast starts or before the podcast starts. But I just want to thank everybody for listening and supporting and your kind notes and kind words. And let's keep doing this. Let's keep learning together. I've got 8 podcasts in the hopper and we're going to have the Impact conference soon. So I'm going to be recording there. And then I've got some other stuff planned, hopefully for the end of the year too. So check this out. Listen to these amazing. Thank you. Just thank you a lot to the folks who sent stuff in. It makes me really happy and smile. And in any event, let's listen in.
Jeff Wood, it's Joseph Kopser, founder and CEO of Ride Scout. I can't tell you how proud I am of you and the team at the Overhead Wire Daily as well as Streets Blog USA for supporting your Talking Headways. 500 episodes is an amazing milestone, and I personally have not only been proud to be a part of it, to be a financial supporter of it, of all the work that you're doing, but your newsletter and your podcast, it makes the complex issues and all these different moving parts a little easier to understand. And more importantly, you do it in such a way that humanizes it and brings it right back down to the person. Because at the end of the day, whether it's policy, law, regulation, no matter what, the fact that you and your team are able to boil it down into the human aspect to help us all understand the impact it has on our lives is something that you should be proud of. I'm going to continue to listen, and I hope more people understand just the great work that you're doing with Talking Headways. 500 now and 500 more to go. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Great work.
My name is Emily Badger. I'm a reporter at the New York Times, and I receive lots and lots of newsletters in my inbox every day, some of which I signed up for, many of which I did not. And the only one that I make a point of opening just about every day is Jeff's newsletter, The Overhead Wire, because it helps me do something I could never do on my own. It helps me survey what's being written around the country about topics that I care about and that I'm trying to keep tabs on. And putting all of that together for me in a really accessible way is such a huge service to me. I'm so appreciative of Jeff, and I wish Jeff congratulations on his 500th episode. Thanks, Jeff.
Hey, this is David Zipper. I am a senior fellow at the MIT Mobility Initiative and a contributing writer at Vox and Bloomberg City Lab, and I want to send a very heartfelt congratulations to Jeff for his 500th episode of Talking Headways and reaching what I believe is 10 years now of the Overhead Wire, which is just really impressive stuff. And I also just want to say thank you to Jeff because there's really nobody who fills the niche that you do in terms of educating people and informing people about news as well as academic research around transportation, around climate, around cities. You know, it's funny, on a personal note, I remember back in 2017, I wrote my very first story for Bloomberg City Lab. It was about GTFS, or transit data. And I was thrilled after that story ran to see that Jeff had included it in Overhead Wire because I knew that was, a pretty high bar to clear just to make it onto the list of stories. And then the next day when it was the most read article of the day, I felt like I'd won the Pulitzer because I know how Seriously, Jeff takes his work, and I know how voraciously his audience sort of gobbles up all that he shares in terms of news as well as academic research. There's just nothing else like Overhead Wire or anything like Talking Headways at all. So again, warm congrats, Jeff. All the best to you in the Bay Area. And here's to another 500 episodes and another 10 years of the newsletter.
Hello, this is Tony Jordan, the president of the Parking Reform Network here in Portland, Oregon. Congratulations, Jeff, on your 500th podcast episode. I want to thank you for helping the Parking Reform Network and myself in a couple ways. First, your daily newsletter is a source of stories for parking reform wins and efforts around the country and world, and we've been using it for years to share those with our members. Second, I first heard about one of our advisory board members, Patrick Sigmund, the first Shoepista, on a podcast you did in 2018, and he was a founding advisory board member and has been an advocate and colleague ever since. So keep up the good work. I'm sure that your work has impacted other advocates and organizations the same way. Here's to 500 more.
Oh man, I keep listening. Every time I listen to these, I've been putting them in and editing them, and I just I don't know. I really don't know what to say to folks. I just want to say great thanks. We'll have a couple more of these over the next few episodes, some written and some audio, and I just want to say thanks to everybody who sent stuff in. It's been really great hearing how the show and the newsletter impacts people. And oh man, let's get to 501. Oh, before we do, I just want to also quick shout out to Hillary Reeves, who has been helping me produce some of the shows that we do with Impact, and the Impact folks have been really big supporters as well. And I really appreciate all of the things that they've done for the space and also for the podcast as well. So we've been doing the Impact podcast with them, and this is one of the ones that we did with Impact. And thanks so much for listening. Cassidy, Boulan, and Thom Stead, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Let's start with Cassidy and then go with Thom.
So I have been at DVRPC for about 13 years now. In that time, I've almost worked exclusively on bike ped transit work. I work now in the Office of Transit, Bicycle, and Pedestrian Planning. I was fortunate to start at DVRPC right out of grad school. It was, just those few years after the recession. So I was happy to have something that was aligned as this position is and was. And I moved to Philadelphia from the southeastern Michigan area. And I moved to Philly to go to Penn. And before that, I lived in Michigan and went to the University of Michigan. So that's the full bio.
Nice.
I am originally from Appalachia, so like really rural southern Ohio. Moved to Cincinnati as a teenager, got really into riding transit as a teenager because I didn't like driving. Went to college in Indiana and eventually moved out to San Francisco, where I had my first job in planning, interning at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. And so that's sort of where I cut my teeth doing business outreach about different bike projects in the Bay Area. After that, I moved to New York City and did my master's degree at the Pratt Institute in City and Regional Planning, and had internships at New York City DOT in the bike ped department, also transit development there. This is also my first job out of grad school, so I moved from New York to Philly for my job at DVRPC, and I've been here for almost 10 years now. I started in Cassidy's group in Office of Transit Bike Ped, and 2 years ago, I moved over to our Office of Mobility Analysis and Design to be the assistant manager. And our work is similar to Transit Bike Ped, but we work on the more technical side of things. I do a lot of traffic analysis to support bike and transit projects. So that's me.
And Cassidy, Thom gave us riding transit when he was a kid as an interest. What was something that got you into this space early on?
I have I think an atypical planning origin story, which I knew in high school I wanted to be a planner. one of my teachers actually gave me, and I still have it, I'm looking at right now, a copy of Suburban Nation, the new urbanism Bible that, came out. I guess that would have been in the very early 2000s. So that just read that, was like, oh yes, like this, whatever this is it. So went to undergrad. I actually did environmental studies and sociology, which I usually say is what I think underpins my overall interest in planning and what I do now. I think, both of those have strains in how I would like define my mission statement. I did AmeriCorps after undergrad. I worked at a community development organization in Detroit, felt really passionately about working in Detroit, and thought that that was going to be a really good fit. And it ended up feeling like not as good of a fit as I thought it would. I still wanted to do planning, but that particular part just felt like, especially at that time, that I wasn't sure, that sort of like, you have to always be chasing money. And, it's a hard way of being in the community development space. So being from Detroit, transit, bicycle and pedestrian stuff has not traditionally been a strong suit, but, is so directly connected to sustainability. And, I think a lot of things about our society can kind of be seen in different ways in our transit network or our transportation network. So I a little bit rolled the dice going into grad school thinking like, transportation feels like a good fit. And it turned out it was. And I think, we're really fortunate in what we do, that we can do the real design part of things. So, Thom and I have traditionally done a lot of like bike infrastructure design, but we can also work on other aspects. And funnily enough, I think, the work we'll talk about in Trenton gets kind of back at that community development space. Maybe I've found my way back there in the end anyhow. But yeah, I think we're lucky in our jobs to be able to do a lot of different aspects of planning and transportation planning that hopefully really can move the needle long term.
It's all connected, right? I mean, everything.
It's all connected, right.
Yeah, Cassidy and I's bond is that we were both sociology majors in college too. And then after school, I like ended up in Indonesia for a year and was like riding around on motorbikes everywhere. And they had BRT in front of my house, and it was the only air-conditioned bus that you could get anywhere. So people would pay extra to ride it. But yeah, I think that my desire to get into planning was really coming from a sociological perspective and in like an equity driven perspective, like where I grew up in Cincinnati. Well, first in rural Ohio, there's absolutely nothing. And if you don't have a car, you're stuck. And then Cincinnati, the transit network growing up was not particularly well funded or frequent. And so, I got to see firsthand what that struggle looks like. And biking there is tough too. There's a lot of hills and things are spaced out. So people are really dependent on cars to get places there. So I think it was really important to me to try to work at fixing those things, but also to live in places where I had access to those things too.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I love hearing people's origin stories because it kind of gives, also, we have young listeners who are like, well, I don't know if I could get into planning. I like this stuff and I'm an advocate, but I don't know how other folks get into it. And then I've gotten emails from folks saying, hey, I heard this story and it's just like made me want to do this, or maybe I should go to grad school, or maybe I should change the way that I'm thinking about planning because I can do it too. Because, it's not always the traditional way of you're in high school and you want to be a planner. Actually, for me specifically, I didn't even know it existed until I got to applying for grad schools. So just kind of come about it from a different perspective, all of us. So I like that. I do want to ask you all about the DVRPC, which is the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. I'm going to use DVRPC throughout the rest of the episode, but I just want to make sure folks know what it is. But I want to ask you, what do you all say to people when they ask you, where do you work?
I don't say DVRPC. I say that I work at the Philadelphia MPO.
It's funny, we are having a lot of conversations around work, and one of the things that's come up is that we need an elevator speech. So I think MPOs are particularly challenging to describe what they do and why someone should care. And I think, I don't know about you, Thom, but I know when I tell people generally what I do, that I design bike lanes, people are immediately like, oh, you must work for the city of Philadelphia, which is a natural reaction. But then, trying to like redirect that of like, well, no, not exactly. Then it gets a little bit harder to say what it is. I guess I say the regional planning agency, which again, I don't know if that really gives people a sense of what that means. Sometimes we'll get into, if you want to get sort of the next level down of wonky, is like we take federal transportation dollars and distribute them across the region and then make sure people are coordinating. But, I'm sure most people's eyes glaze over if you're at that sentence.
Yeah. If I'm trying to go very simple, I tell people that I try to keep pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users from getting hit by cars. That's like my number one goal with my job is just safety and trying to make it safer for people to use those modes.
Yeah, that's what we're all here for. I feel like that's been such a huge thing because of the amount of people that are killed on the roads every year. I do want to say that most MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, if we're doing the TLAs, three-letter acronyms, or planning agencies around the country are often in only one state. So I'm curious how you all hop over between Pennsylvania and New Jersey, because it's a kind of a rare animal there.
Yeah, and actually at our origin, there was a suggestion that Delaware would even be part of it too, but they didn't join the compact. So we do actually some planning activities for the Wilmington metro area. I think like how that operates day to day is complicated, I guess, in a way. There's each one of the DOTs has their own kind of particular personality and things they want to see done. But, our work program is developed through requests by our planning partners and our board members in particular. So, through our counties, which there's 5 in Pennsylvania and 4 in New Jersey, we get those requests for projects. And so our year-to-year mix really varies depending on the requests that we got. I think both Thom and our groups have developed more programs over time too. And then once it's a program and it's ongoing, I think we do seek to have that geographical, if not direct equality, something that approaches offering services on both sides of the river. But I think as a practitioner, it's really interesting because you really have a better idea of what can differ between state to state. So if you just worked in one state, you might take for granted these 10 things are true across all the states. And I think we really have a sense of how much really does vary state to state. Even if the feds ask the states to do something, what that looks like can be pretty different. So I think it really allows us to have a greater sense of how states and their laws and the DOTs themselves really impact what's done, how money's spent, what kind of activities are done at the local level.
Yeah, just to dig deeper into that, I mean, if you're comparing New Jersey and Pennsylvania specifically for what we do, the topic of road ownership comes up a lot. So in New Jersey, the state owns mainly highways and interstates, but in Pennsylvania, PennDOT owns many of the arterials in the city of Philadelphia, a lot of like more local roads in our suburban counties. And so that ownership makes a big difference in terms of the work that we do, and specifically the work that I do in our PennDOT Connects bike-friendly resurfacing, or now we're calling it Complete Streets Resurfacing program. We're now trying to do something similar to our work in Pennsylvania in New Jersey, because while the state doesn't own those arterial roads, the counties often do. And so we're working at a more local level, trying to look for similar types of opportunities for bike and pedestrian facilities.
How hard is it to get agreement from the states or from localities on what you're going to do with the road? I know in other states like Utah, when the state DOT gets involved, it often gets harder to do something like a streetcar or complete streets or those types of things. And so I'm curious how that kind of operates where you're at.
I think probably similarly to what you just described. The degree might vary from one state to the other. But our tactical urbanism support program that we call Expo, we've really found that we have to work directly with municipalities on municipal-owned roads because, we've had some opportunities to work with counties in New Jersey, but for the most part, working with those folks who can make the direct decisions about their roadways is the easiest way to get things done. We also do tend to find that the municipalities are more open to maybe trying more innovative things or new things because they just don't have the years worth of like processes and red tape that has developed around some of these things. So I think it really does make a big difference. And I think, sort of the same way that federalizing a program or using federal funding adds, all of this stuff to a project, I think the bigger the government entity involved, the more processes and sign-offs and history that you need to be kind of working through and with. And not to say that there's not folks who want to do that, but it's harder.
Yeah, different entities have different priorities. I would say that in recent years, PennDOT has really shifted towards improving conditions for bicyclists and pedestrians on its roads. That isn't to say that they don't care about level of service and queuing and have worries about gridlock, but I will say that there is certainly more acceptance of the importance of cyclists on their roads. In New Jersey, just because NJDOT doesn't own that many roads where you can physically cycle, it just doesn't, that conversation doesn't come up as much. But I think at the county level, we are, having more of those conversations, and slowly I feel like we're starting to turn a corner. I think people have seen all of the improvements that the city of Philadelphia has made in recent years and, is sort of wanting to do things like that for themselves. I think our trails program has been really successful for a long time, but people are recognizing that people need ways to get to the trails. People want to be able to bike to the trail, not to drive to the trail. There's also first and last mile to transit, and looking for opportunities to bridge those gaps and recognizing that, hey, these roads are maybe the key to getting there. So especially working with PennDOT, I think that a lot of it for me has been learning to speak the language. So I'm a planner by trade, but I've had to really learn how engineers work and think in these spaces, and learn to talk the talk and be that sort of in between and a bit of a translator. So, I learned how to do traffic analysis, do synchro and VSIM to make the case that we can do these facilities, we can build protected bike lanes without causing gridlock.
Cassidy, I want to ask you about Trenton, New Jersey specifically. What can you tell us about the city and what you're doing there?
The city is a really interesting place. It's the capital of New Jersey. I think it was an industrial center at an earlier point, so it has a lot of those post-industrial problems. And unfortunately, being the state capital did not save it or significantly turn the tide on those. It also has a really strong community of folks that are new to the US, and that's mostly people from Central America, although I think it represents several different countries. So there's not always the organization that might come if it was, all from one particular area. But that is really interesting. About 35% of residents don't speak English at home. I think the folks that are in Trenton now, you have a lot of people really dedicated to the city, which is really interesting to see. So a lot of people that feel really strongly about working in their community and bettering their community. I'm also really struck when we do projects there at the real strong, and maybe this is not for a good reason, but the real strong consensus around traffic safety being a problem and being something that people want something done about. So I think when you have people who show up to meetings and at the very least all agree that it's not dangerous to be out walking and biking in my community, I think that is a starting point, I think can be really strong to, offer other opportunities and potentially make changes. I think it has about 90,000 people, so it's not a particularly big place. It also does have some really strong existing transportation infrastructure. There's a transportation hub that has Amtrak, it has New Jersey Transit, it has SEPTA, which is Philadelphia's transit provider, and it also has some big regional trails that run through the city. So there's a lot to build on, and there's also a lot of issues that a lot of overburdened communities experience, and Trenton is one of those in that way. So it's a really interesting place to work. And in some ways, being from the Detroit area, there's a lot of things about it that remind me of Detroit, and obviously a much smaller setting, but in a really positive way. Like some of the things that especially when I was younger, that I just really loved about Detroit and it having so much potential and all of these motivated folks. A lot of that comes through in Trenton too.
Where does that strong sense of motivation come from? Is it the communities that are there already, or is it just people feel like they have an issue with the safety that had been happening before?
I think in part, which is unfortunately more common than it should be, a lot of the places that most need good governance don't have good governance. And the city's gone through a number of things with past elected officials, being indicted. And I don't think they ever went bankrupt, but, some different levels of state oversight that I think the city really struggles to provide some of those basic services. And that's, basic, not even just some of these things that we would never consider, more than basic, but unfortunately are, especially around transportation. So I think that they both see a need that's not being responded to by the city government and potentially other governments. And they can get things done in that way that, it's a small enough place, there's potential, there isn't a lot of processes and regulation around things. So you can be scrappy and get things done in that way that I think can be really gratifying. And for, motivated residents you can see the change that you can make. And I think through our Complete Streets work, we've met a lot of those folks, and that's what it makes it really enjoyable to work in the city of Trenton is, connecting with those folks and kind of bringing their work and their talents to make our work better, or to hopefully even catalyze their work to a bigger stage or a bigger level, which I think we're doing with a couple of them.
So there's a new bike plan, Our Streets, and it's coming soon, I imagine. What's notable about it in your mind?
Two things immediately come to mind. One is we pretty much set a requirement that the vast majority of things, especially on arterials or our more higher volume, higher speed streets, would be separated bike lanes. There are very few, if any, conventional bike lanes in the plan. And that was just something that we felt like this is a 21st century plan is not going to be filled with conventional bike lanes, especially in a community where the understanding is streets aren't safe. That those two things don't go together. I think the other thing, and I'm sure there's other communities that have done similar things, but certainly to our knowledge, we really took the engagement process to be one of the most important parts of the plan itself. And I think there was a couple of reasons for that. One, traditionally engagement hasn't happened to the level that it should or could. They've also, the city has had a really hard time in the past connecting with that Latinx folks. Those folks, it's been hard. They're not necessarily organized in community groups or other groups that you can kind of tap into that grass tops level. That's a new phrase I've learned recently. There's not a lot of grass tops to connect to. So it's been really hard to, bring them into city outreach processes. And that's, not even then considering the language barrier that can exist. I think the other part that we knew was really important is to date, the only thing that exists in Trenton is maybe one conventional bike lane and one buffered bike lane. So when you want to tell people, we might take some parking or consolidate parking or, make these street changes, and they haven't experienced themselves what would be on the other side of that, I think you have an education gap that needs to be filled before you can even get meaningful feedback from people about, what they might be willing to do and then what they could get for, making those changes. So I think the education part of it was really critical as well. And we did that in a couple of different ways. At each one of the events, we used temporary materials to create pop-up bike lanes. So at one of them, we had a protected bike lane, one we had a cycle track to really let people see, there's a delineator. That's sort of what it would look like, to be able to touch it and feel it in real life. We also made a project video that we took GoPro footage of riding around in bike lanes around Philadelphia and then used that footage in the video to show folks this is, what a protected bike lane kind of feels like. Here's some of the attributes of it. This is what it feels like when someone's parking next to you, but they can't get to you or they can't hit you because there's a barrier in between. So I think we really tried to think through both of those pieces so that we could get something that ultimately is implementable, which, if one of our top goals was separated facilities, the second top goal was something that could be implemented.
And Thom, I wanted to bring you in here as well because you focused on complete streets in Philadelphia and are probably sharing some of those same, issues with folks that you're working with as well.
Certainly. Yeah. So, every neighborhood in Philly has, different attitudes, feelings towards bike and pedestrian facilities. This program has touched every part of the city at this point, but some of our biggest wins have been in places like West Philadelphia. So, yeah, I think some of the biggest challenges were about like going out and doing that like engagement work. So, just to like step back and talk through like what the program is to begin with. So, DVRPC works really closely with the city of Philadelphia. We identify streets that aren't exactly low-hanging fruit, but, we think that there might be the possibility of a road diet there. So it's possible going into these projects that it might just not be possible at all and everything has been for naught. But when you win, and it feels great. So the city of Philadelphia and DVRPC pick out 2 arterial roadways per year to study. DVRPC goes out and we do traffic counts at all the intersections along these corridors. And then we pull that into traffic modeling software called Synchro. And we also simultaneously work with the city to, come up with an initial design that they want to test. So we have these existing conditions and we have these ideal designs in mind. And then we test these designs in Synchro and see what the level of service is at each intersections, what queuing's like. So how far do cars queue back from each of these intersections? And the reason that we have to do this is that these are PennDOT owned roadways. And so in order to get the approval to move forward with these projects, to even go to these communities and like do this outreach, like we have to have this go ahead from PennDOT in the first place. So we basically have to prove that the project is possible without creating total gridlock. And in some cases, like, we've been able to squeak by with a few intersections where, things aren't ideal, but the rest of the corridor is doing so well that it's, okay. But yeah, I think a couple of our biggest projects have been in West Philadelphia. And for people that come to the Impact Conference, I hope that they will get an opportunity to get on a bike or maybe take the train out to the very western border of Philadelphia to Cobb's Creek, where you can then get on a bike on, I think it's Chestnut Street. Yeah, Chestnut Street. And you can ride on a facility that we worked with the city of Philadelphia. It went from being no bike lanes whatsoever. It was 3 lanes of traffic, lots of swerving, lots of crashes happening. And we turned it into a parking protected bike lane with 2 lanes of traffic. And now there's a continuous parking protected bike lane that goes from Cobb's Creek Avenue all the way to 34th Street in University City. That's 3 consecutive miles of parking protected bike lane. So we did this analysis. PennDOT said, after some quibbles, after some design changes, okay. And then the very heavy lifting came, and Otis was like, okay, we have this design that we know on paper will work, but will the city or will the people that live in the community get behind it? And so, Otis folks went door to door, talking to people, putting out postcards, getting people to community events, doing videos to get all of this buy-in. And they got the support of the council member, Jamie Gauthier, who was instrumental in getting this through. And so, yeah, now they have one of the best bike lanes in the city of Philadelphia. And it goes both ways. So you can go from West Philly to University City and vice versa on Walnut Street climbing. So I think of it as like a new spine in terms of bike facilities in our city.
You guys have put together also some great story maps and a page that shows kind of all the success that you've had. I'm interested what the feedback has been on that and how people have been responding to kind of some of the successes that you have had.
I mean, I think the successes have been, like I said, each place is very different. So we also have a program that works in the suburbs. So our work on Complete Streets work using resurfacing to construct bike lanes started in the suburbs, identifying these like low-hanging fruit opportunities where PennDOT's going to resurface a road. There's space in the roadway to construct a conventional or buffered bike lane. And through the process of resurfacing, they just add it in. And, they go to the municipality and they get that. They have them, write a support letter and it gets constructed. And we've had good feedback from the communities on that thus far. Others have been mixed bags. Sometimes you don't get to use all the treatments that you want in order to get it through. And I don't like to think of these facilities as like the end game per se, but rather a step towards, a more permanent and high quality facility. So one example of a project that I worked on was 15th Street in Center City, which it'll be very close to the conference and people will be able to go and check out. This is a really, really busy street with like off ramps from a highway. It goes right by the new police headquarters, has some really tricky intersections at Vine Street that people have to go through. And some of the trade-offs that we had to make at a couple of these intersections in order to get it built were not what we wanted. But we're hoping that by the process of constructing these lanes, calming traffic and creating like a culture of cycling in this place, we can eventually get to a place where our next step is to do it the way that we wanted to do it, not just use delineators and quick curb or plastic curb, but rather, put in granite curbs, put in hard separation all the way through. So I think of it as this is just the beginning rather than an end in itself.
And for both of you, I mean, this is something that politically comes up is it's hard to design a street that, you understand how you're going to be able to make it safer, but there's these compromises and other things that have to happen to actually implement it in the place where you want to put it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think with me, we're constantly in conversation with engineers from PennDOT and streets that are like, if you build it like this, then, there's going to be significant traffic. And like, that's who we hear the most from. So it's like, who are the loudest voices in the room? And when you're building a facility in a place that has like no bike activity whatsoever, it's hard to make that case at first. But I think building the facility and doing careful tracking of like how it gets used after the fact is really important also in making your case in the future. So yeah, it's definitely can get political. In the city of Philadelphia, council members have a lot of say over what gets constructed. 15th Street was in a district where there hadn't been much built because the council member at that time, was not really in favor of constructing new bike facilities. That leadership has changed, but the fact that we got it built in the first place was really a testament to how much outreach the city of Philadelphia did and the case that we made through our analysis to get it done. So it's really about teamwork and using all of the steps in that process to their greatest possibility. So yeah, politics play a big part in what gets constructed. But, I think that we're definitely seeing changes and wins in recent years.
And I would say in the Trenton context, the issue is a little bit different in that the money's limited, that becomes the first impediment, and the political will to either hire more staff to find more money and manage more money, or with the very limited resources that exist to allocate more to these issues is really where we see the problem, or why we're not moving forward on some of the things that maybe we would like to. When you're resurfacing 2 streets a year or something like that, that's not a whole lot of opportunity to really be building out the network, let alone how are you going to pay the cost for, the lowest cost might be delineators. And, then we know there's all the maintenance issues. So I think the work we've done in Trenton, and we've done some tactical urbanism work that has utilized delineators and some new striping, but already we're seeing the maintenance issues. And I think there isn't enough political will to say we want to spend more on this or do it differently. So even I think if there's community support, and I think there is, it's just really hard to then translate that into a next step.
Yeah, money is definitely also an issue in the city of Philadelphia too, not quite at the same level as Trenton, but when we're looking at the facilities, sometimes we have to look and see like, oh, it's like putting a bike signal in here is like going to cost a lot of money. Can we physically afford to do this? Are there grants that we can pull from to do this? And luckily, I'm not the money person on the city side having to make those decisions. But, it's certainly an issue in Philly as well.
You all talking about the kind of the conflicts between DOTs and some of the money things, but also there's the working with maybe some agencies or others who aren't as representative. And in the report that you released, Cassidy, about transit and biking. There's kind of a missing piece of talking with transit agencies about this too, because it's something that I feel like, doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, that project, which was looking at bike bus interactions for New Jersey Transit. And, I think they are seeing complete streets elements be installed across the state. A lot of times, one of the first things they said to us is these things just go out. No one even talks to them. So, already you can see that coordination piece, which, is one of the major things that MPOs do, is being the coordinator, the convener. So there's not that conversation even at the beginning, but then we're really seeing changes need to happen to accommodate all the users safely. And I think for that project, we did a scan of what other places are doing. And I think the bike bus issue is far from settled as establishing best practices, especially if you're not fully reconstructing a street with a large budget. And I think that project was really interesting because, again, we went to Trenton to kind of do a case study because we knew about the bike plan. We have these established relationships with the city folks, the advocate folks there, and then the county within which it is, which is Mercer County. We have relationships with them. So we did a workshop with the transit agency and the road owners and advocates to talk through, what could we do? So on one side that's owned by the county, there's existing buffered bike lanes. On the Trenton portion in the bike plan, there's a proposal, or the recommendation is for parking protected and just separated bike lanes. And we really had everyone talk through, what could we do here? What would that look like? And I think there was a particular need for that context, which was, there's not no bikers, but there's also not 2,000 bikers a day. What do you do in that middle case? And same for buses. There weren't no buses, but if there's bus every 45 minutes or every 30 minutes, what is sort of the appropriate level of additional infrastructure and additional efforts to make those conditions safer for both transit drivers and transit users and also bicyclists? So it was really interesting to work through that with folks. And again, back to that question, money came up of, okay, let's say we've identified these new toolbox of best practices. Now, who's paying for that? Whose budget does that go into when, I think there could be a lot of pointing fingers, but was a really interesting ability for us to kind of take our existing relationships and, the sort of trust we've built with a lot of those folks and then bring it to other projects. I think that can be really powerful. I think it's also really powerful and interesting that because our group is transit bike ped, I think we really get to focus on all three of those modes and bring kind of our specialties within, transit sometimes can be siloed, bike ped can be siloed, but we get to work across our group to bring those perspectives to our projects. So I think that for a lot of the projects really can strengthen them because we have that transit perspective and that bike perspective on staff and they're working together on the project. So I think it allows us to usually deliver something that, isn't from maybe one of those perspectives more than another.
Yeah, just to build on that, I mean, the reason that we changed the name of our program from bike-friendly resurfacing to complete streets-friendly resurfacing is that we were looking at roads that the city of Philadelphia and SEPTA were interested in adding bus lanes to. And so suddenly we weren't just looking at impacts on cars, but also impacts on transit in the area and how can we speed things up in new areas. So we have a new project starting off soon that's looking at adding bus lanes to a corridor to see how we can speed up service in those areas. So yeah, it's exciting stuff. I think SEPTA for us has been part of the conversation pretty much throughout. Almost all of these roads that we work on, these major arterials have SEPTA service. So we have to be really careful of what we do so that, we aren't trying to put a bike lane where a current bus stop is, and then we suddenly have mishaps between buses and bikes, or, suddenly we're taking away a lane where a bus has to U-turn in order to then pull over and get to its layover spot. So having those conversations is really important so that you're not going and, implementing something that adversely impacts bus service in those areas.
I am interested in what the bus drivers feel about this. It's a perspective I don't think I've heard much of, is how they feel about cyclists. Because you often hear about the conflicts between, buses and vehicles and bikes, but not often between buses and bikes, which are two vastly different geometries, right? You have a huge bus and maybe a tiny person on a bike.
Yeah, I think some other places have done, I'll point to the New York City training they do with drivers is really amazing. We talked to the MTA as part of that project, and they have just gone all in on Vision Zero, to talk to some folks who you would otherwise not necessarily pick them out of a room as being, number one Vision Zero proponent, but like they got it so much, and the way they've really incorporated it into their training, I have to imagine those bus drivers, the way they would talk about it is really different. I also think that from the anecdotes we heard, it's similar to how drivers might talk about bikes, which is like they come out of nowhere and they're always being erratic and we never know what they're going to do, which all of those things to me say that there's not infrastructure for them, because people do that sort of behavior when there is not an otherwise safer way to be behaving. So I guess I would take it with a grain of salt. Not that those aren't completely valid and they're not right about some of that, but I think, we haven't done a lot, or don't have a lot of places in our region where the road has been designed and built to safely accommodate both of those modes. And I think once we have some of those, I'd be really interested to talk to bus drivers who, maybe are driving sometimes on those roads and then sometimes on roads where everyone just has to mix. And like, what is that experience like? Because they are looking at the road all day. They have a real sense, I think, of how people are navigating those streets. So, yeah, I would say I'm not sure they're ready to be advocates yet, but I bet they would be if they could see real results of, people having clearer paths to like more predictable behavior.
That's what I was going to say. I think that bus drivers really want to see predictable behavior. Like if the bike lane keeps the cyclists in the bike lane and they don't have to think about, engaging with them, then that makes their life easier as drivers because, they have enough going on inside of the bus and in front of them. So yeah, I think Cassidy's right on about that.
I've also chatted previously with Dr. Ryerson at Penn on her work about cognitive workload and the stress cyclists feel at intersections. I'm curious if that cyclist perspective and stress idea was something that was taken into account in either of your work, designing bike lanes and thinking about these projects from the Trenton perspective or from the Philadelphia perspective.
Yeah, I certainly think, obviously, intersections, protected bike lane is not going to solve the cognitive load at an intersection, or certainly some things can do a better job. But I don't think the bike plan, totally nails that completely. But I think the overall idea of a separated or protected bike lane, I think, that's why we set that as the standard for the report. And I think we've had more and more conversations lately about really needing to, I don't know if it's bring out best practices from other regions or help educate our road owners about different ways to do protection. I think the death of the delineator is probably around the corner. It is not a good option for almost anything. From a money perspective, the maintenance costs, I don't know, the life cycle that cannot be any cheaper than an asphalt curb. And I think for a bicyclist, I don't think any bicyclist would choose a delineator over something with more heft. So yeah, I think that with not particularly thinking through intersections, which I think there's more to do there, I guess we see separated facilities as, and the research shows it's the thing that's going to get people to switch modes. So, I think in Trenton, first and foremost, we want to make roads safe for the folks already biking. But, that's the first step. And then the second step is, especially for people who need more options, more affordable options, to get those people comfortable trying to bike. And ultimately for climate change, this is our task for as long as humans are here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, stress plays a huge part in the designs that we develop. I think that we really want to work towards making facilities that are in line with best practice. But at the same time, we're very money constrained. And so we have to be really cognizant of like trying to like strike the balance of creating the most comfortable facility that we can with what we have. I know that it's not a great excuse for using delineators, but I think that we're just trying to get things in the ground and trying to improve things where we can. In recent years, the city has put in more bicycle signals in places to help reduce some of that stress at intersections. So we're, reducing the interactions between turning vehicles and cyclists going through intersections, which I think is huge in terms of the stress that cyclists feel in places. But yeah, as a cyclist in Philadelphia, I feel stressed out a lot. And you make a mental map of like the facilities that feel the least stressful, but also the streets that you can ride on that feel less stressful. I'm encouraged by other work that the city is doing in terms of like creating slow zones. So there are neighborhood slow zones where they're, doing traffic calming in order to reduce speeds on streets, doing all kinds of different new treatments that we haven't really seen here before. So I think that doing what you can in order to make streets that, probably can't really fit a bike lane, to make them at least a little bit less stressful for bikes and peds is a step in the right direction. But yeah, we're just doing the best that we can in order to create the best facility that we can and still get the permission of our state entities. But I definitely have seen in my work with the city of Philadelphia, especially in recent years, they're really pushing to do very high quality facilities wherever possible. So yeah, we're trying our best.
It's not too bad. I saw, reports that crashes and serious injuries have dropped 34% on dozens of streets in Philadelphia that have been reconfigured with safety projects. So I think that's positive direction, and I appreciate that. What's next for you all in terms of projects or, positive outcomes?
Our most exciting thing, even though it's pretty abstract still at this point, is all of this work with Trenton has culminated in us using some leftover and otherwise expiring coronavirus money to fund a position for 4 years, that a position or a full-time equivalent that will be solely focused on completing various complete streets implementation projects in Trenton. So, we have already laid out some of the barriers of the challenges to that mission, but I think it really will allow us to dig in a community in a way that at the MPO level, we rarely, if ever, do. This is definitely a first for us as an agency, but to be able to continue to build on our existing relationships, to, ourselves go after foundation money or other money to implement some of these things, and just to sort of see what we can accomplish. Their staff is kind of up to their limits, just making the city, do the things it legally has to do. But this will allow us to, again, based on what we've seen and learned in the last several years, help them hopefully do some things that otherwise would certainly not happen. And we have a competitive TDM program in our region called Travel Options Program. And with some folks in Trenton, we submitted an application that will do some in-school travel lessons, teaching kids about how to safely walk and bike. And the Trenton has its own cycle advocacy group. And right now they have a community outreach garage that's staffed exclusively by volunteers. But with this money, we'll be helping to support and give them an opportunity to professionalize their staff, to, hire staff for the first time in their history. And then that staff will be operating the garage with more hours. I think we also, as part of that, they get a lot of bikes donated. So we hope to pilot a citywide bike giveaway program. So I think there's a lot of things we see the potential for, and we see folks who could help make that a reality. And I'm excited to have the next 4 years to see, what we can do with all of those opportunities and see how much money we can find to make that happen.
In the Complete Streets world, I think that, as I mentioned before, some of the excitement over seeing these road diet projects in the city of Philadelphia has, inspired places outside of the city to try to get in on the act. So one of the things that our program has started doing in the last year or so is to do road diet analysis for our suburban counties that also. So in the past, we were really just looking for that low-hanging fruit, what we could sort of easily implement. But as we were going along, we were like, well, this road could also be road dieted, and that's not something you can simply do during a resurfacing. Like you need to like do this analysis, but like why can't we do the analysis? And now we are. And I think that we're making some moves on that front outside of Philadelphia. We'll continue our work in the city of Philadelphia. I have a project in Northwest Philly. I have a project I did in South Philly that I've heard rumblings that potentially a bus lane is getting built with also some bike facilities, but fingers crossed for sure. And we'll be picking 2 new corridors soon to study. I mean, part of it is that we're really dependent on like what's in the resurfacing list for PennDOT. Some years are more exciting than others. Some roads are more, optimal for what we do than others. And so we're looking forward to figuring out which roads we'll continue to look at. But I think we also have more work with SEPTA coming up, looking at opportunities for doing, bus lanes, BRT-esque service. And so we'll be helping with that kind of analysis as well. SEPTA's bus revolution has been adopted. And so there are big changes to the network happening. And a big part of that will be redesigning streets in order to optimize the performance of those routes. And hopefully we can continue to be part of that moving forward.
So the Impact Transit and Community Conference is going to be in Philadelphia in October. What's the less obvious thing or place you would encourage people to visit when they come?
Come to South Philly. I'm a proud South Philadelphian, and it's like not a place where lots of tourists will come other than to get a cheesesteak. I would encourage you to keep going south and try to make it down to FDR Park to the Southeast Asian market. I think it's one of the most special things that Philadelphia has going. So the Southeast Asian market goes on through, I think it's like spring through fall in Philadelphia, and it brings together folks from all over Southeast Asia. So we have a big Indonesian community. We have a lot of people from Cambodia, Laos, folks from all over that make some delicious food that you're probably not going to find in too many other places. And the vibe is incredible. So I would really encourage people to come down to FDR Park and see that. We also have like an incredible new playground that got built there. That's
all about the playgrounds now.
I just took my nieces there this last weekend, but they have like a 3-story high slide that kids have to like climb up to. And my nieces are sort of like, this is scary, but fun. Scary, but fun. So I think FDR Park is like a hidden treasure, and they're doing a lot of work there. And it's a place where I think some of the really unique communities that Philly possesses come together in a really great way. You can take the Broad Street line pretty much all the way there and then walk into the park. So come down to South Philly.
I feel like, Jeff, that is the hardest question you have asked us this interview for a bunch of reasons. I think I was convinced to move to Philly based on some of the really beautiful neighborhoods. So I would encourage folks to get beyond, or maybe go south of Spruce. I live in Center City. It's easy to stay in Center City. It's got everything you need. But there's some really, beautiful row homes, lots of really beautiful historic streets. We have some really nice park spaces around Independence Hall. So I would say take a nice evening walk. Hopefully it won't be 98% humidity.
In October.
Yeah, in October, who knows? But that, I think, would be one of my recommendations.
Quince Street is my favorite street in the city.
Yeah, that's right by my house, and it's lovely.
Yeah, there's like houses there from like the 1700s, and it's people fly all these flags. It's so beautiful. I think it's one of the things that makes Philly really unique.
It looks like some comments in the chat here.
Ooh,
I'm almost
Bach.
feel like I'm on a YouTube now doing some mobile sessions that are going to hit a few neighborhoods so folks can sign up for the mobile sessions as well, mobile workshops that go different spots. And then PK Slam obviously is something that impactors have been loving since it began, and that'll be at BOK. Is it Bach?
The Bach
Is that how you say
building.
it?
Yeah, it's like
The Bach building.
it's a former high school that they turned into like a mixed-use community space. So it has like a bunch of like artist studios in it, restaurants. It has a rooftop bar. Jefferson University has like a clinic for the community there, a medicine clinic. There's a great coffee shop in it. It really like transformed that part of South Philly because it brought all these like really awesome things into one place and like created an affordable space for like independent businesses. So I think Bach is amazing and would totally recommend that people do that. Definitely walk down Passyunk Avenue. That's my neighborhood and has lots of great little, independent businesses. Some of the best ice cream in the city, great restaurants, award-winning restaurants. So big fan of Passyunk.
We're going to have to get you guys to be tour guides, I think, when we get there.
Proudly. I've gotten several people to move to Philadelphia based on giving them tours. So happy to do it.
That's quite a track record. I love it. Well, so where can folks find out about the work that you all do at DVRPC? Is there a place where they can go and get more information?
All of our formal reports are on DVRPC.org. Our Tactical Urbanism Program Expo does have its own webpage at DVRPC.org/expo. I think some of our things are maybe, don't have a polished deliverable, so it might be a little bit harder to find information about, but our communications group does a great job with the social medias. So there's probably some posts, various things about some of the projects that we talked about.
And Hillary will put stuff in the show notes, and we'll have stuff in the notes on the Impact website as well. Cassidy and Thom, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This was so fun.
I always want to talk about the work.
Thanks for joining us. The Talking Headways podcast is a project of The Overhead Wire and appears first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our generous Patreon supporters for supporting this show and Mondays at The Overhead Wire. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/TheOverheadWire. Sign up for our 18-year-old daily newsletter by visiting TheOverheadWire.com or check the show notes for other cool merch and opportunities to connect. Follow along using your podcatcher of choice, but if you can't find it there, you can always find the show at its original home, usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways.